Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Surface. Kyle Brennan had always been comfortable with depths that would terrify most men. 200 feet below the Gulf's surface, surrounded by tons of steel and the crushing weight of the ocean, he found a peace that eluded him on dry land. The offshore drilling platform Deepwater Phoenix had been his second home for the past 8 years, where his reputation as a safety supervisor was built on an iron will and an unforgiving memory for anyone who cut corners. At 34, Kyle possessed the weathered hands of a man who'd earned every callous and eyes that missed nothing. His colleagues respected him because he never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do himself, and feared him because he never forgot a mistake. In an industry where one oversight could kill dozens, forgiveness was a luxury Kyle couldn't afford. His wife Monica had once loved this intensity. They'd met at a company barbecue 7 years ago, when she was working as a corporate events coordinator for Brennan Industries. Ironically, no relation despite the shared name. Monica was everything Kyle wasn't. Spontaneous where he was methodical, social where he was solitary, optimistic where he calculated risks. She brought lightness to his structured world, and he brought stability to her chaotic one. Their son Tommy was 5 now, a miniature version of Kyle's intensity wrapped in Monica's infectious smile. During Kyle's month-long offshore rotations, Monica would send videos of Tommy building elaborate sandcastles with the same patient precision Kyle used to construct safety protocols. These glimpses of home were Kyle's anchor during the isolation of deep-water work. But lately, something had shifted in those videos. Monica seemed distracted, her smiles not quite reaching her eyes. Their video calls grew shorter, filled with awkward pauses where conversation used to flow. When Kyle questioned her about it during his last shore leave, she blamed stress from her new job at Meridian Marketing, where she'd started working 6 months ago after Brennan Industries downsized their events department. Kyle had met Monica's new boss, Derek Voss, at a company holiday party. Everything about the man had set Kyle's teeth on edge, from his perfectly styled hair to his expensive watch to the way his eyes lingered on Monica. Derek was the kind of smooth-talking executive who'd never worked a day of manual labor, the type who made decisions from climate-controlled offices about men who risked their lives in brutal conditions. But Monica had laughed off Kyle's concerns. "You're being paranoid," she'd said, playfully hitting his shoulder. "Derek's just enthusiastic about work. You know how these marketing types are." Kyle did know. That was exactly the problem. Now, as he stood on the platform's observation deck watching the sun set over the endless Gulf waters, Kyle felt the familiar weight of intuition that had kept him alive in dangerous situations. Something was wrong at home, and every instinct screamed that Derek Voss was at the center of it. His supervisor, Mac Henderson, joined him at the railing. Mac was one of the few men Kyle genuinely respected, a 30-year veteran who'd started on oil rigs when safety was an afterthought and survived through pure instinct and iron will. "You've been distracted lately," Mac observed, his weathered face creased with concern. "Everything all right at home?" Kyle considered the question. In his world, you didn't share personal problems. Weakness was contagious and deadly. But Mac had earned the right to ask. "Just a feeling," Kyle said finally. "You know how it is." Mac nodded. In their business, feelings were data. Intuition kept you alive when instruments failed and protocols broke down. "Take some personal time when we rotate back," Mac suggested. "Sometimes you need to go ashore and handle things before they handle you." Kyle was about to respond when his satellite phone rang. Personal calls during rotation were rare and usually meant emergency. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Kyle Brennan," he answered. "Mr. Brennan? This is Carol Winters with Child Protective Services. I'm calling about your son, Tommy." The world seemed to tilt. Kyle gripped the railing as the woman's voice continued, professional but urgent. Tommy was found wandering downtown around midnight. He was alone, disoriented, and when we asked where his mother was, he said, "Mom's friend told me to get out." In the background, Kyle could hear his son crying, not the normal tears of a child, but the broken sobs of someone whose world had shattered. "I want my daddy," Tommy's voice echoed through the phone. "I want to go home." Mac took one look at Kyle's face and was already moving toward the communications center before Kyle could speak. Within minutes, the emergency helicopter was being prepped for an unscheduled extraction. As Kyle gathered his gear, His mind was already working with the cold precision that had kept him alive in countless emergencies. Monica and Derek thought he was trapped at sea, helpless and unaware. They had no idea what was coming for them. But they would learn. Chapter 2. Pressure Rising. The helicopter ride back to shore gave Kyle 90 minutes to think, and that was 90 minutes too long. By the time they touched down at the mainland heliport, he'd constructed and discarded a dozen scenarios, each one darker than the last. The reasonable explanations, medical emergency, family crisis, misunderstanding, evaporated when he replayed Tommy's words. Mom's friend told me to get out. Carol Winters met him at Child Services, a tired woman in her 50s whose eyes held the kind of compassion that came from seeing too much. Tommy ran into Kyle's arms with a desperation that broke something fundamental in Kyle's chest. "Daddy," Tommy sobbed, his small hands clutching Kyle's shirt as if afraid he might disappear. "I was scared. It was dark and I couldn't find Mommy." Kyle held his son while Carol explained what they knew. A security guard at a downtown office building had found Tommy around midnight, still in his pajamas, wandering the parking garage. He was dehydrated and exhausted, but physically unharmed. When questioned, Tommy could only say that Mom's friend had told him to leave the house and that Mommy was too busy to take care of him. "We've been trying to reach your wife since 2 a.m., Carol said. "Her phone goes straight to voicemail, and there's no answer at your home address." Kyle knew why. Monica thought he was safely offshore, incommunicado for 3 more weeks. She and Derek were probably celebrating their freedom, oblivious to the fact that their carelessness had just exposed everything. "Can I take him home?" Kyle asked. "Of course. We'll need to follow up, but given the circumstances and your work schedule, we understand this might be complicated." Kyle signed the necessary paperwork, his signature steady despite the rage building in his chest. As they drove home in his truck, still parked at the heliport from his last shore leave, Tommy fell asleep in his car seat, emotionally exhausted. The house was dark when they arrived at 3 a.m. Kyle carried Tommy inside, noting details with the methodical attention that had made him exceptional at his job. Monica's car was gone. Her favorite overnight bag was missing from the closet. Most telling, the expensive bottle of wine Kyle had been saving for their anniversary was gone from the kitchen counter. Kyle put Tommy to bed in his own room, then systematically searched the house. In Monica's dresser, hidden beneath rarely worn formal clothes, he found a burner phone. The text history was brief but damning. "Derek, coast clear tonight. Kay's offshore for 3 weeks. Monica, finally. Can't wait to be free of this charade. Derek, about time. Pack what you need. We'll figure out the kid situation later. Monica, he's asleep. Won't even know I'm gone." Kyle sat in his dark living room, Tommy's steady breathing audible through the baby monitor, and let the rage settle into something colder and more dangerous. Monica hadn't just cheated, she'd abandoned their child to pursue her affair. In Kyle's world, that was unforgivable. He picked up his phone and called Monica's regular number. It went to voicemail, just as Carol had said, but Kyle knew she'd check her messages eventually. "Monica, it's Kyle. I'm home. Tommy's with me. When you're done with whatever you're doing, we need to talk." The message was calm, even casual. Let her think she still had time to construct a story. Next, he called his lawyer, Ben Crawford, waking him despite the early hour. Ben had handled Kyle's contracts and insurance policies, but more importantly, he was one of the few people who truly understood Kyle's methodical nature. "Kyle? Jesus, what time is it?" "Ben, I need you to start divorce proceedings. Abandonment, adultery, whatever gives me full custody of Tommy." There was a pause. "What happened?" Kyle explained the situation in clinical terms. Ben, to his credit, didn't waste time on sympathy or platitudes. "I'll start the paperwork, but you need to be careful here. Document everything, but don't do anything that could hurt your custody case." "I understand." "Kyle, I mean it. I know how you operate on the rig. Absolute control, zero tolerance for mistakes. This is different. The law doesn't always reward the person who's right." Kyle ended the call without responding. Ben was a good lawyer, but he didn't understand the fundamental truth Kyle had learned in his dangerous profession. Sometimes the law was a luxury you couldn't afford. As dawn broke, Kyle prepared breakfast and woke Tommy gently. His son was confused but reassured by his father's presence. They ate together in comfortable silence until Tommy asked the question Kyle had been dreading. "Where's Mommy?" Kyle looked into his son's trusting eyes and made a decision that would define everything that followed. Mommy made some bad choices, buddy, but Daddy's going to make sure you're safe. Is she coming back? Kyle's voice was steady as steel when he answered. Not if I can help it. Chapter 3. The Depths. Monica finally called that evening, her voice tight with panic when Kyle answered on the first ring. Kyle, what are you doing home? You're supposed to be on the rig for 3 more weeks. Emergency extraction, Kyle said calmly, settling into his living room chair, where he could watch Tommy playing with his building blocks. Our son was found wandering the streets at midnight. Funny thing, you weren't here. The silence stretched long enough that Kyle wondered if the call had dropped. When Monica spoke again, her voice had shifted into the defensive tone he'd heard when she was caught in smaller lies. I had a work emergency. Derek needed me to handle a crisis client. I arranged for Mrs. Patterson next door to watch Tommy, but she must have fallen asleep. Kyle almost admired the smoothness of it. Mrs. Patterson was 73 and had been in the hospital for hip surgery for the past 2 weeks, a fact Monica would know if she'd been home. That's strange, Kyle said. Mrs. Patterson's been in the hospital since last Tuesday. I called to check. Another pause. Kyle, I can explain everything. I'll be home in an hour. No rush. Tommy and I are having a good time. We might even order pizza. Kyle. One more thing, Monica. I found your burner phone. The line went dead. Kyle smiled grimly and went to join his son, who was building an elaborate tower with methodical precision that reminded Kyle of himself at that age. They played together until Tommy's bedtime, Kyle reading him the same adventure stories about brave explorers that his own father had read to him. After Tommy was asleep, Kyle sat at his computer and began the methodical research that was his specialty. Derek Voss, he discovered, was more interesting than his polished surface suggested. The man had worked for 5 different marketing companies in 7 years, always leaving under vague circumstances involving restructuring or strategic realignment. His LinkedIn profile was carefully curated, but employment gaps suggested a pattern of instability that his expensive wardrobe and confident manner concealed. More interesting was Derek's current financial situation. A deep dive into public records revealed a man living far beyond his legitimate means, a downtown penthouse apartment, luxury car payments, and country club memberships that would strain even a successful marketing director's salary. Either Derek had family money, or he was financing his lifestyle through means that wouldn't survive close scrutiny. Kyle was still researching when he heard Monica's car in the driveway at 11 p.m. He remained seated at his computer as she entered, noting how she'd taken time to change clothes and fix her appearance before coming home. Even now, she was trying to control the narrative. Kyle, we need to talk. He turned to face her, his expression neutral. Monica looked beautiful as always, but Kyle now saw the calculation behind her smile, the way she positioned herself to appear vulnerable and contrite. I'm listening. Things have been difficult lately. You're gone so much, and I've been lonely. Derek, it started as just friendship, but I won't lie to you anymore. I have feelings for him. Kyle nodded as if she'd reported the weather. And Tommy, I never meant for him to be affected. Derek and I just needed some time to figure things out. I thought Mrs. Patterson was watching him. You thought a woman who's been in the hospital for 2 weeks was watching our son. Monica's mask slipped slightly. I made a mistake. People make mistakes, Kyle. No, Kyle said quietly. You made a choice. You chose to abandon our child to spend the night with your lover. That's not a mistake. That's who you are. Kyle, please. I know this is hard, but we can work through this. Marriage counseling, whatever you need. Kyle stood up, and something in his movement made Monica take an involuntary step backward. In the dangerous world of offshore drilling, Kyle had learned to project absolute authority when lives were at stake. That same presence now filled the room like a gathering storm. Monica, I want you to listen very carefully. You have until tomorrow evening to pack your personal belongings and leave this house. I've already filed for divorce and full custody. If you contest it, I'll make sure every detail of how you abandoned our son becomes public record. You can't do this. I have rights. You forfeited those rights when you left Tommy alone to pursue your affair. Ben Crawford will explain the legal details tomorrow. Monica's composure finally cracked. You bastard. You think you can control everything, just like on your precious oil rig. Well, Derek and I won't be intimidated by your threats. Kyle smiled, and Monica took another step back. Good. I was hoping you'd involve Derek in this conversation. In fact, I insist on it. Something in Kyle's tone made Monica's anger falter. What do you mean? Tell Derek I'd like to meet with him. Privately. Man to man. Kyle, you can't. I can't what, Monica? Have a conversation with the man who's sleeping with my wife? The man who helped convince you to abandon our son. Kyle's voice remained conversational, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Tell Derek that Kyle Brennan would very much like to discuss the future with him. Monica backed toward the door, her instincts finally registering the danger that Kyle's calm demeanor concealed. I'll send Derek's address to your phone. Kyle continued. We'll meet tomorrow evening. 8 o'clock. Kyle, this is insane. You can't threaten people. I'm not threatening anyone, Monica. I'm simply suggesting that Derek and I need to have a discussion about boundaries and consequences. After all, he's been making decisions that affect my family. It's only fair that I get to make some decisions that affect his. Monica fled the house, and Kyle listened to her car speed away into the night. He checked on Tommy, who was sleeping peacefully, then returned to his computer to continue his research on Derek Voss. By dawn, Kyle had compiled a comprehensive profile of his target. Derek's financial instability, his pattern of workplace departures, his expensive lifestyle, and most interestingly, his complete lack of experience with truly dangerous men. Kyle had spent years working with people who understood that some lines, once crossed, led to consequences that no amount of charm or money could undo. Derek was about to receive an education in those consequences. The game was no longer about saving his marriage or protecting his feelings. This was about protecting his son and ensuring that the people who had threatened Tommy's safety understood the price of their choices. Kyle picked up his phone and began making calls to colleagues who owed him favors. Men who worked in industries where problems were solved with methods that corporate executives never encountered. Derek Voss had no idea what was coming for him, but he was about to learn that some depths were too dangerous to explore. Chapter 4. Pressure Test. Derek Voss lived in a downtown penthouse that screamed new money and insecurity. Kyle observed the building from across the street, noting the minimal security, the single entrance, and the parking garage that would provide perfect privacy. Everything about Derek's choices suggested a man who'd never considered that his actions might have consequences he couldn't charm or buy his way out of. Kyle had spent the day making arrangements. Tommy was staying with Mac Henderson's wife, Linda, who'd raised 3 boys and understood that sometimes emergencies required flexibility. Linda had asked no questions when Kyle explained he needed to handle some urgent business related to Monica's departure. That boy's got good bones, Linda had said, watching Tommy build a fort in their living room. Don't you worry about him. Some situations need handling before they get worse. Linda understood. Mac had told her enough stories about Kyle's methodology that she knew this wasn't about emotion or revenge. This was about eliminating a threat to his family with the same systematic approach he used to prevent drilling accidents. At 7:45 p.m., Kyle entered Derek's building through the parking garage. The security system was laughably inadequate, a basic keypad that Kyle bypassed with tools he'd acquired during his years working around sophisticated electronic systems. He took the elevator to the 20th floor, his movements calm and purposeful. Derek answered the door wearing an expensive silk shirt and the kind of confident smile that suggested he still thought this was a negotiation between civilized men. Kyle, come in, come in. Monica told me you wanted to talk. I have to say, I admire a man who can discuss things rationally. Kyle stepped into the penthouse, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, and the bottle of wine on the coffee table, the same vintage he'd been saving for his anniversary. Derek had opened it, a deliberate insult that confirmed everything Kyle needed to know about the man's character. Nice place, Kyle observed. Must be expensive on a marketing director's salary. Derek's smile faltered slightly. I've been fortunate with investments. Kyle moved to the windows, looking down at the street 20 floors below. You know, Derek, I spend most of my time working at heights where a single mistake can kill you instantly. It teaches you to be very careful about risk assessment. I'm sure it does. Look, Kyle, I want you to know that Monica and I never intended for things to develop the way they did. These things just happen sometimes. Kyle turned from the window, his expression unchanged. Things like abandoning a 5-year-old child so you could spend the night together? Derek's confidence was visibly cracking. That was a miscommunication. Monica thought she'd arranged supervision. Monica thought a hospitalized woman was watching my son. But you know what I think, Derek? I think neither of you gave a damn what happened to Tommy as long as you got what you wanted. Now wait just a minute. Kyle moved with the sudden efficiency of a man accustomed to emergencies. Derek found himself pressed against the window, Kyle's hand gripping his expensive shirt, the city lights spinning dizzily below. Let me explain something about consequences, Derek. In my line of work, carelessness doesn't just get you fired, it gets people killed. So we have zero tolerance for individuals who put others at risk through their selfishness. Derek's face had gone pale, his earlier confidence evaporating as he realized Kyle wasn't here for a civilized discussion. Kyle, please. Let's talk about this reasonably. I am being reasonable. Reasonable would be ensuring that the people who endangered my son understand that their actions have permanent consequences. Kyle released Derek, who stumbled backward, his shirt torn and his composure shattered. Here's what's going to happen, Derek. You're going to end your relationship with my wife immediately. You're going to find employment in another city, preferably on the other side of the country. And you're going to pray that I never have reason to think about you again. Derek straightened his shirt, some of his arrogance returning. You can't threaten me. I'll call the police. Kyle smiled, and Derek took an involuntary step backward. Go ahead. Tell them that Kyle Brennan visited you to discuss your affair with his wife. Tell them how you helped convince that wife to abandon her child. See how sympathetic they are to your situation. Derek's bravado crumbled. Monica said you were controlling, but this is insane. No, Derek. Insane would be what I do if you don't follow my suggestions. You see, I've spent the day learning about your financial situation. Your expensive lifestyle, your pattern of leaving jobs under mysterious circumstances, your complete lack of legitimate means to afford this place. Derek's face went white. You can't. I can and I have. It's amazing what you can discover about someone when you apply the same attention to detail that keeps people alive in dangerous situations. Would you like to know what I found? Derek sank into his expensive couch, the fight gone out of him. I found a man living far beyond his means, with gaps in his employment that suggest interesting survival strategies. I found financial records that don't quite add up and business relationships that might not survive close scrutiny. Kyle moved to the coffee table and picked up the opened wine bottle. His wine, in Derek's apartment, shared with Kyle's wife. But here's the most interesting thing I discovered, Derek. You have no idea how to handle truly dangerous people. Your entire life has been about manipulation and charm, dealing with people who fight with lawyers and social pressure. You've never encountered someone who solves problems with methods that your world doesn't acknowledge. Kyle poured the wine into a glass and took a sip, his eyes never leaving Derek's face. This wine was a gift from my father-in-law when Tommy was born. I was saving it for a special occasion. Thank you for helping me realize that tonight qualifies. Derek found his voice, though it shook slightly. What do you want? I want you to disappear from our lives completely. I want you to find a new job in a new city and never contact Monica again. I want you to understand that if you ever do anything that affects my son's safety or well-being, the consequences will be permanent. And if I refuse? Kyle finished the wine and set the glass down with deliberate care. Then you'll discover that some problems can't be solved with lawyers or police reports. You'll learn that there are people in this world who understand that certain actions require responses that exist outside the boundaries of civilized society. Kyle moved toward the door, then paused. Derek, I'm going to give you some advice that might save your life. You're used to dealing with people who play by rules, who have reputations to protect and careers to consider. I'm not one of those people. I'm someone who's comfortable with depths that would kill you, who's made decisions in life or death situations that would paralyze you with fear. Kyle opened the door, then turned back one final time. You have 48 hours to make the right choice. I suggest you use them wisely. As Kyle left the building, he felt the familiar satisfaction of a problem assessed, analyzed, and addressed with appropriate measures. Derek Voss was no longer a threat. The man's entire demeanor had confirmed that he lacked the spine to challenge someone who operated outside his comfortable world of corporate politics and social manipulation. Now it was time to deal with Monica. Chapter 5, Fracture Point. Monica was waiting in the driveway when Kyle returned home, her face a mask of fury and fear. She'd obviously spoken to Derek, and the conversation hadn't gone well for either of them. What did you do to him? She demanded as Kyle stepped out of his truck. I had a conversation with the man who's been making decisions about my family's welfare. Nothing more. Derek called me crying, Kyle. Crying. He said you threatened to kill him. Kyle paused at the front door, key in hand. Did I? That doesn't sound like something I'd say. I prefer to be more precise in my communications. Monica grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin. This isn't a joke. You can't terrorize people just because you're angry. Kyle looked down at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. The touch that had once comforted him now felt like a violation. Monica, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry. Anger is an emotion, and emotions make you sloppy. What I am is committed to protecting my son from people who've demonstrated they can't be trusted with his safety. Our son. No, Tommy is my son. You forfeited your claim when you chose your lover over your child's well-being. Monica released his arm, stepping back as if slapped. I made one mistake, Kyle. One night where my judgment was impaired. Your judgment wasn't impaired, Monica. Your priorities were just finally visible. Kyle entered the house, and Monica followed, her desperation growing. Kyle, please. We can fix this. I'll end things with Derek. We can go to counseling, whatever you need. Kyle turned to face her in their living room. The room where they'd planned their future, where Tommy had taken his first steps, where Kyle had once believed he was building something permanent and good. Monica, let me ask you something. When Derek suggested leaving Tommy alone that night, what did you say? Monica's silence was answer enough. Did you object? Did you insist on finding proper childcare? Did you even hesitate? It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. You prioritized your affair over your child's safety, and the only reason Tommy wasn't seriously hurt was pure luck. That's not a mistake, Monica. That's a fundamental failure of character. Monica sank into the couch where they'd once watched movies together, where she'd fallen asleep against his shoulder during Tommy's infancy. So what happens now? You destroy my life because I fell in love with someone else. Kyle considered the question with the same methodical approach he brought to everything else. I'm not destroying your life, Monica. I'm protecting my son's life. There's a difference. And Derek? What about what you did to him? Derek made the same choice you did. He prioritized his desires over a child's safety. Now he's learned that choices have consequences. Monica's desperation transformed into something uglier. You think you're so righteous, don't you? The perfect father, the devoted husband. But you were never here, Kyle. You chose that rig over your family every single day. Kyle felt something cold settle in his chest. I chose to provide for my family. I chose to work a dangerous job so you could stay home with Tommy when he was born, so you could pursue your career without financial pressure, so we could build the life you said you wanted. I never asked for that life. No, but you took it. You took the house, the security, the comfortable lifestyle. You just didn't want the responsibility that came with it. Monica stood up, her composure finally shattering completely. I won't let you take Tommy from me. I'll fight you in court. I'll tell them about your threats, your violence. Kyle moved closer, and Monica stopped mid-sentence. Monica, you need to listen very carefully. I have documentation of your abandonment of Tommy. I have the burner phone with text messages proving your affair. I have testimony from Child Protective Services about finding our son wandering the streets alone while you were with Derek. Kyle's voice remained steady, but something in his eyes made Monica back toward the wall. More importantly, I have 8 years of documentation showing my commitment to this family, my financial support, my safety record, my reputation in the community. What do you have? Monica's face crumpled, but Kyle continued with relentless precision. You have a pattern of irresponsible behavior culminating in child abandonment. You have an affair with a man whose financial situation will crumble under legal scrutiny. You have no independent income, no stable housing, and no credible explanation for why our son was found alone in the middle of the night. Kyle, please. I'm not trying to hurt you, Monica. I'm trying to protect Tommy from people who've proven they can't prioritize his well-being over their own desires. Kyle moved to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where they'd once planned to raise their family. Here's what's going to happen. You'll have supervised visitation rights until Tommy turns 18. Child support will be determined by the court based on your actual earning capacity, not the lifestyle Derek was financing. You'll move out by this weekend. And if I refuse? Kyle turned back to her, and Monica saw something in his expression that made her understand why men twice his size deferred to his authority on the oil rig. Then I'll ensure that every aspect of your relationship with Derek becomes public record. His financial irregularities, your abandonment of Tommy, the complete timeline of your affair. Derek's career won't survive that kind of scrutiny, and neither will any claim you might have to being a fit parent. Monica slumped against the wall, defeated. I loved you once. I know. I loved you too. But love without responsibility is just selfishness wearing a prettier name. Kyle walked to the front door and held it open. You have until Friday to collect your belongings. After that, all communication goes through Ben Crawford. Monica walked to the door, then paused. Tommy will ask about me. Yes, he will. And I'll tell him the truth, that sometimes people make choices that hurt the people who love them, and that actions have consequences. Kyle. Goodbye, Monica. After she left, Kyle locked the door and went to check on Tommy, who was still at the Hendersons but would be home tomorrow. The house felt different now, not empty, but clean, like a job site after all the safety hazards had been identified and removed. Kyle's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Brennan, this is Derek. Monica told me about your conversation tonight. I want you to know that I'm taking a position with a company in Seattle. We'll be gone by the end of the week. Kyle smiled grimly and deleted the message. Derek had learned the lesson. Some people responded to reason, others required demonstration of consequences. The key was matching the approach to the individual. His phone rang, Mac Henderson checking in. How'd it go? Problem solved. Tommy and I will be fine. Good. Linda's got dinner ready if you want to come get your boy. Kyle looked around the house that was now truly his and Tommy's. Tomorrow, he'd start the process of rebuilding their life without the people who'd threatened its foundation. Tell Linda we'll be there in 20 minutes. And Mac? Thank you. That's what family does, Kyle. Real family. Chapter 6. Controlled Descent. 3 weeks later, Kyle's life had settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable for the first time in months. Tommy had adapted to Monica's absence with the resilience of childhood, especially after Kyle explained that sometimes grown-ups made mistakes that meant they couldn't live together anymore. But that didn't change how much Daddy loved him. The custody hearing had been a formality. Monica's lawyer had advised her not to contest Kyle's petition after reviewing the evidence, and Derek's sudden departure to Seattle had eliminated her primary emotional support. She'd accepted supervised visitation every other weekend, a hollow victory that neither she nor Kyle pretended was satisfying. Kyle was home for a 2-week shore leave when the first surprise arrived, a visit from Detective Ray Foster of the Houston Police Department. Foster was a compact man in his 40s with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen enough domestic situations go bad to recognize patterns. Mr. Brennan, I'd like to ask you a few questions about Derek Voss. Kyle invited the detective in, noting the way Foster observed everything. The family photos, Tommy's toys, the orderly but lived-in quality of a home where someone actually cared about the environment they were creating for a child. Can I ask what this is about? Mr. Voss filed a complaint alleging that you threatened him with physical violence during a visit to his apartment 3 weeks ago. Kyle considered this information with the same methodical approach he brought to all problems. I did visit Derek's apartment. We had a conversation about his relationship with my wife and how it was affecting my son. According to Mr. Voss, you physically assaulted him and threatened to kill him if he didn't leave town. That's interesting. Did Derek mention that he was drinking wine that he'd stolen from my home? Wine that my wife brought to his apartment while she was supposed to be caring for our 5-year-old son. Foster made a note. Mr. Voss also claims you've been investigating his personal finances and making threats about exposing confidential information. Kyle smiled slightly. Detective, I'm curious. What did Derek tell you about the circumstances that led to our conversation? He said there was a marital dispute. Did he mention that my son was found wandering downtown at midnight because Derek and my wife left him alone to pursue their affair? Foster's pen stopped moving. Come again. Kyle retrieved the file he'd prepared for the custody hearing. Police reports, Child Protective Services documentation, hospital records proving Mrs. Patterson's absence, and the text messages from Monica's burner phone. My son was abandoned by his mother and her lover so they could spend the night together. When I came home early from my offshore rotation to handle the emergency, I felt it was appropriate to discuss the situation with the man who'd helped convince my wife to neglect our child's safety. Foster reviewed the documents, his expression growing increasingly serious. This report says your son was found alone at midnight in a downtown parking garage. That's correct. Derek and my wife thought I was trapped offshore and wouldn't discover their actions for 3 weeks. They were wrong. And your conversation with Mr. Voss? Kyle met the detective's eyes directly. I explained to Derek that his decisions had endangered my son and that such behavior needed to stop immediately. I also suggested that he might be happier pursuing his career in a different city, given the complications his presence was creating for all involved. Did you threaten him with violence? I explained that men who endanger children sometimes face consequences that exist outside the normal social framework. Derek appeared to understand the concept. Foster closed his notebook and studied Kyle for a long moment. Mr. Brennan, I have to ask, did you physically harm Derek Voss or explicitly threaten to kill him? No, Detective. I had a frank conversation with a man about the consequences of his choices. If Derek interpreted that as a threat, perhaps it's because he recognized the gravity of what he'd done. Foster stood up, gathering his materials. Mr. Brennan, I've seen a lot of domestic situations go sideways. But I've also seen what happens when people who should protect children choose not to. Derek Voss struck me as a man who was more upset about facing consequences than about what those consequences were for. Kyle walked the detective to the door. Will there be charges? Not from my department. Derek's complaint doesn't align with the evidence of what actually happened here. A man has the right to express his concerns to someone who endangered his child, especially when those concerns are expressed without violence. After Foster left, Kyle felt the familiar satisfaction of a problem handled with appropriate precision. Derek had tried to use the legal system to continue his pattern of avoiding consequences, but the truth had proven more compelling than his manipulation. That evening, Tommy was building with his blocks when he looked up at Kyle with the serious expression that meant he was working through something complicated. Daddy, why did Mommy leave? Kyle set down his book and moved to the floor beside his son. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt other people, buddy. Mommy chose to spend time with someone else instead of taking care of you, and that's not okay. Is she coming back? She'll visit sometimes, but she won't live here anymore. It's just going to be you and me. Tommy considered this with 5-year-old logic. Will she make better choices now? Kyle looked at his son, this small person who deserved protection and honesty and the security of knowing that at least one parent would never prioritize anything above his well-being. I don't know, Tommy, but I promise you that Daddy will always make choices that keep you safe. Tommy nodded with the acceptance that children granted to explanations that felt true, even when they were painful. Can we finish the tower? Absolutely. As they built together, Kyle reflected on the past month. Monica and Derek had tried to construct their relationship on a foundation of selfishness and deception, and that foundation had crumbled the moment it faced real pressure. But Kyle and Tommy were building something different, a life based on honesty, responsibility, and the understanding that some things were worth protecting at any cost. The tower they constructed that evening was sturdy and straight, built with patience and precision. Like everything else Kyle intended to build for his son's future. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. 2 months after Derek's departure, Kyle received a phone call that changed everything. The caller was Special Agent Sarah Chun from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and her first words immediately captured Kyle's attention. Mr. Brennan, we need to discuss Derek Voss and your wife's relationship with him. They met at a downtown coffee shop, Kyle choosing a corner table where he could observe the entire room, a habit from years of working in environments where situational awareness was survival. Agent Chun was younger than Kyle expected, with the sharp intelligence of someone who'd built a career on seeing patterns that others missed. Mr. Brennan, we've been investigating Derek Voss for financial fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. Your wife's relationship with him has become relevant to our case. Kyle felt pieces clicking into place with mechanical precision. How so? Monica provided Derek with access to financial information about your family, bank accounts, investment portfolios, insurance policies. Information that Derek used to establish false identities and fraudulent credit accounts. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm. Explain. Agent Chin opened a thick folder, revealing bank statements, credit applications, and photographs of documents that Kyle recognized as his personal financial records. Derek's pattern is sophisticated. He cultivates relationships with women who have access to their husband's financial information, particularly men who work in high-paying, travel-intensive jobs. Oil workers, merchant marines, long-haul pilots. Men who are away for extended periods and might not immediately notice irregularities. Kyle studied the documents, seeing his own signature forged on loan applications, his social security number used to open accounts he'd never seen. Monica provided all of this. Unknowingly, we believe. Derek convinced her to photograph documents for insurance purposes during your marriage, claiming he wanted to help her organize your financial planning. She thought she was being helpful. Kyle felt a cold fury building that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with the methodical rage of someone who discovered a systematic violation of everything he'd built. How much damage? Total exposure is approximately $200,000 across 17 fraudulent accounts. Derek was sophisticated. He made payments just long enough to establish credit history, then disappeared before the accounts went into default. Agent Shin pulled out more documents. But here's where it gets interesting. Derek made a mistake when he fled to Seattle. He tried to establish the same pattern with a new victim, but we were already tracking his methods. When we arrested him, he immediately offered to provide information about his previous victims in exchange for a reduced sentence. And Monica? Unknowing accomplice at most. Derek's the predator here, not your wife. But we need your cooperation to build the case. Kyle leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. Monica hadn't just been cheating. She'd been systematically manipulated by a professional criminal who'd used her emotions to gain access to Kyle's carefully built financial security. What kind of cooperation? Testimony about the timeline of their relationship, documentation of any financial irregularities you noticed, and... Agent Shin paused. We understand you had a confrontational conversation with Derek before he left town. We need to know exactly what was said. Kyle smiled grimly. I told Derek that men who endangered children faced consequences outside normal social frameworks. I suggested he might prefer to pursue opportunities elsewhere. Did you threaten him with violence? I explained reality to him. Derek chose to interpret that as a threat. Agent Shin made notes. Derek claims you physically assaulted him and threatened to kill him. But his story doesn't match the evidence or his behavior afterward. What do you mean? If someone actually threatened your life, you call the police immediately. Derek waited 3 weeks, then filed a complaint only after we arrested him in Seattle. That suggests his accusations are more about creating leverage than reporting genuine crimes. Kyle felt pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. Derek hadn't just been a predator targeting Monica. He'd been a professional criminal who'd used their marriage as cover for systematic financial fraud. The abandonment of Tommy had been incidental to Derek's real purpose, using Monica's emotional vulnerability to gain access to Kyle's financial information. Mr. Brennan, there's something else. Derek's pattern suggests he's done this before, multiple times, in multiple cities. We believe he's responsible for at least 12 similar cases over the past 5 years. Kyle thought about the other men like himself, hardworking individuals who trusted their wives with financial information, only to discover that trust had been weaponized against them by a professional manipulator. What do you need from me? Full cooperation with our investigation. Documentation of all financial irregularities. Testimony about Derek's behavior and your interactions with him. Kyle considered the request. Cooperation would mean revisiting the worst period of his life, reliving Monica's betrayal and the danger that had been posed to Tommy. But it would also mean ensuring that Derek faced consequences for a pattern of criminal behavior that extended far beyond what he'd done to Kyle's family. Agent Shun, I have one condition, which is, I want to speak with the other victims. The other families Derek targeted. That's unusual. These men deserve to know that Derek's pattern was professional, not personal. They deserve to understand that their wives were victims too, manipulated by someone who does this for a living. Agent Shin studied Kyle for a long moment. You want to help them? I want them to understand what really happened to their families, the same way you've helped me understand what really happened to mine. Mr. Brennan, most of these families didn't survive intact. The financial damage combined with the marital betrayal, it destroys people. Kyle thought about Tommy, about the life they were building together, about the importance of understanding the difference between genuine betrayal and professional manipulation. All the more reason they deserve the truth. Agent Shin closed her folder. We'll arrange meetings with the victims who consent to participate. But Mr. Brennan, you should know, testifying against Derek will require revisiting everything that happened. Are you prepared for that? Kyle thought about the systematic way Derek had targeted his family, the professional calculation behind what Kyle had interpreted as simple adultery and child endangerment. Agent Shun, Derek made one fundamental mistake in his assessment of me, which was, he assumed I was like his other victims, someone who would be destroyed by his manipulation and too broken to fight back effectively. Kyle stood up, his decision made. He was wrong. I'm not broken, and I'm definitely going to fight back. Chapter 8. Surface Pressure. The meeting with Derek's other victims took place in a federal building conference room. 11 men whose stories formed a pattern of professional predation that was both systematic and devastating. Kyle recognized the look in their eyes, the hollow exhaustion of people who'd lost not just money, but their faith in their own judgment. Agent Chin facilitated the introductions, explaining how Derek's operation had worked. Each victim fit the same profile: hardworking men in high-paying, travel-intensive jobs who trusted their wives with financial access. Derek had targeted the wives with surgical precision, identifying women who felt isolated by their husbands' work schedules and vulnerable to attention from a charming, sophisticated man. Michael Torres, a merchant marine captain, spoke first. Maria thought she was helping organize our finances. Derek convinced her that I was hiding assets, that she needed to document everything to protect herself in case something happened to me. Jim Patterson, a long-haul pilot, nodded grimly. Same story. Rebecca thought Derek was a financial advisor helping her understand our investments. She gave him access to everything. One by one, the stories emerged, each variation on the same theme. Derek would cultivate relationships with isolated wives, convince them their husbands were financially irresponsible or potentially unfaithful, then position himself as both emotional support and financial advisor. The women would provide access to accounts, documents, and personal information, believing they were protecting their families. Kyle listened to each story, recognizing elements of his own experience, but understanding now that Monica's betrayal had been part of a larger, more calculated operation. How many marriages survived? Kyle asked. The silence was answer enough. Of the 12 families Derek had targeted, only 3 marriages remained intact, and those were hanging by threads. Derek was good at finding pressure points, Agent Chin explained. He didn't just steal money, he destroyed trust. Even when wives realized they'd been manipulated, the husbands often couldn't separate the betrayal from the manipulation. Kyle thought about Monica, about the gradual changes in her behavior that he'd attributed to simple infidelity. Now he understood that she'd been systematically groomed by a professional who understood exactly how to exploit her vulnerabilities. The difference in your case, Mr. Brennan, Agent Chin continued, is that Derek made a crucial error. He endangered your child. The other men looked at Kyle with something approaching envy. Their stories were purely financial and emotional. Kyle's had included a clear threat to Tommy's safety that had given him moral justification for his response. Derek's pattern is to disappear before consequences catch up with him, Agent Chin explained. But your confrontation forced him to make desperate moves that led to his arrest. Without your intervention, he might have disappeared completely. Michael Torres leaned forward. What exactly did you say to him? Kyle considered the question carefully. These men deserved honesty about methods they might not have considered. I explained that men who endangered children faced consequences outside normal social frameworks. I suggested he might prefer to pursue opportunities elsewhere. And he left. Within 48 hours. Jim Patterson laughed bitterly. I hired lawyers, filed police reports, went through proper channels. Rebecca and I are still in counseling, and the financial damage will take years to repair. You had one conversation, and the problem disappeared. Kyle felt no satisfaction in the comparison. The situation was different because of Tommy. When someone threatens a child's safety, the rules change. Maybe the rules should change more often, Torres muttered. Agent Chin intervened before the conversation could drift toward vigilante justice. The important thing now is ensuring Derek faces appropriate consequences through the legal system. Mr. Brennan's approach worked in his specific situation, but it's not a model for general application. The meeting continued for 2 hours, with each victim providing testimony that would contribute to the federal case against Derek. As the session concluded, Kyle realized that his experience with Derek had been both unique and typical. Unique in its resolution, typical in its pattern. After the other victims left, Agent Chin walked Kyle to the elevator. Mr. Brennan, I have to ask, do you regret how you handled the situation with Derek? Kyle considered the question. Do I regret protecting my son from someone who endangered his safety? No. Do I regret that it took a threat to make Derek face consequences for his actions? Yes. The other victims don't have your resolution. They're still living with the damage Derek caused. They're still living with uncertainty about what really happened to them. Once Derek is convicted, they'll have closure. That's something. Is it enough? Carl stepped into the elevator, then turned back to Agent Chun. Agent Chun, those men lost more than money. They lost their ability to trust their own judgment, their faith in their marriages, their confidence in their ability to protect their families. Derek didn't just commit financial fraud, he committed emotional terrorism. And you think he should face consequences beyond what the federal system will provide? Kyle's expression remained neutral. I think Derek should face consequences proportional to the damage he's caused. Whether that happens through federal court or through other means is up to the universe to decide. The elevator doors closed before Agent Chun could respond, leaving Kyle alone with the knowledge that Derek's trial was still months away, and that justice deferred was often justice denied. But Kyle was a patient man, skilled at working in hostile environments where timing and precision mattered more than speed. Derek would face consequences for what he'd done. The only question was whether those consequences would come from the federal court system or from the universe's more direct methods of balancing accounts. Either way, Kyle would be ready. Chapter 9, Deepwater Rising. Derek Voss's federal trial began on a crisp October morning, 6 months after his arrest in Seattle. Kyle sat in the courtroom gallery, watching the man who'd nearly destroyed his family face the methodical presentation of evidence that would determine his fate. Derek looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the weight of facing consequences he couldn't charm or manipulate his way out of. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. 17 victims, $200,000 in fraudulent charges, and a pattern of behavior stretching back 5 years. Derek's defense attorney attempted to portray him as a man who'd made poor decisions during emotional crises, but the evidence painted a different picture: a professional predator who'd systematically targeted vulnerable families. Kyle testified on the third day, his voice steady as he described Derek's infiltration of his marriage and the abandonment of Tommy that had precipitated their confrontation. Defense counsel tried to paint Kyle as a violent man who'd intimidated their client, but Kyle's calm recounting of facts made Derek's accusations sound like the desperate deflections they were. "Mr. Brennan," the defense attorney pressed, "isn't it true that you threatened to kill my client if he didn't leave town?" Kyle met the lawyer's eyes directly. "I explained to Mr. Voss that men who endangered children sometimes faced consequences outside normal social frameworks. If he interpreted that as a death threat, perhaps he understood the gravity of what he'd done. That sounds like a threat to me. That sounds like a warning to me. There's a difference." The judge intervened before the exchange could escalate, but Kyle's point had been made. Derek had endangered a child and faced consequences for that choice. The jury's expressions suggested they understood the distinction. Monica testified the following day, looking fragile and tired as she described how Derek had systematically gained her trust and access to Kyle's financial information. Her testimony was devastating to Derek's case, painting him not as a lover caught up in an affair, but as a calculating predator who'd used her emotions as tools for theft. "Did you love Derek Voss?" the prosecutor asked. Monica's voice was barely audible. "I thought I did, but I realize now that I was in love with someone who never existed. Derek created a persona designed to manipulate me. Do you regret your relationship with him?" Monica looked directly at Kyle for the first time since entering the courtroom. "I regret every decision that put my son at risk. I regret betraying my husband's trust. I regret being naive enough to be used by someone like Derek." Kyle felt no satisfaction in Monica's obvious pain. She'd been a victim too, manipulated by someone who understood exactly how to exploit her vulnerabilities. But victimization didn't excuse the choice to abandon Tommy, and Kyle's expression remained neutral as she left the witness stand. The trial concluded after 2 weeks, with Derek's conviction on all charges. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison and ordered restitution to all victims, money that most of them would never see, since Derek had spent their stolen funds maintaining his fraudulent lifestyle. Outside the courthouse, Monica approached Kyle as he waited for his ride. "Kyle, can we talk?" They walked to a nearby park, where they'd once brought Tommy to play during happier times. Monica looked older than her 31 years, worn down by months of legal proceedings and the collapse of everything she'd thought she understood about her life. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, she began, but I need you to understand that I never meant for any of this to happen. Kyle studied her face, seeing genuine remorse, but also the fundamental weakness that had made her vulnerable to Derek's manipulation. Monica, I understand that you were manipulated, but you still made choices. You chose to trust Derek over me. You chose to leave Tommy alone to pursue your affair. Being manipulated doesn't excuse those choices. I know. I've been in therapy, trying to understand how I let this happen. How's that going? Monica's laugh was bitter. My therapist says I have issues with abandonment and validation seeking that made me vulnerable to someone like Derek. Apparently, my childhood prepared me perfectly to be victimized by a professional manipulator. Kyle felt a flicker of sympathy for the woman he'd once loved. That explains the vulnerability, but not the choices. No, it doesn't. Monica sat on a park bench, looking out at the playground where Tommy had once played. Kyle, I want you to know that I understand why you did what you did. Why you couldn't forgive me. Why you had to protect Tommy from me. Do you? You saw me clearly before I saw myself clearly. You recognized that I was someone who would prioritize my own emotional needs over my child's safety, and you acted to prevent that from happening again. Kyle joined her on the bench, maintaining careful distance. Monica, I didn't want to destroy our marriage. I wanted to protect our son from people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted with his well-being. I know, and you were right. Monica wiped her eyes with a tissue. I've been seeing Tommy every other weekend for 6 months, and you know what I've realized. What? He's better off with just you. He's more confident, more secure, more trusting. I damaged him by prioritizing Derek over his safety, and you've spent months repairing that damage. Kyle thought about Tommy's progress over the past months. His son had thrived in the stable environment Kyle had created, secure in the knowledge that his father would never prioritize anything above his well-being. Tommy still loves you, Monica. I know, but love isn't enough, is it? Love without reliability is just another way of hurting people. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching other families play in the park they'd once enjoyed together. Kyle, I have a favor to ask. What? I'm moving to Phoenix. My sister offered me a job with her real estate company, a chance to start over somewhere that doesn't have memories of Derek and the mess I made. Kyle felt neither surprise nor sadness at this news. What about Tommy? I'll still see him during holidays and summer breaks, if that's okay with you. But I think he needs consistency more than he needs a mother who's still figuring out how to be trustworthy. Kyle respected the honesty of her self-assessment. Are you sure? I'm sure that Tommy deserves a parent who puts his needs first, always. You've proven you're that parent. I'm still learning how to be. Monica stood up, shouldering the purse that had once held the burner phone Derek had given her. Kyle, will you tell Tommy that I love him, but that I need to go away for a while to become the kind of person who deserves to be his mother? Kyle stood as well, seeing the woman he'd married and recognizing that she was finally taking responsibility for her choices, even if it was too late to save their family. I'll tell him you love him enough to make sure he's safe, even if that means making difficult choices. Monica nodded, tears flowing freely now. Thank you. For protecting him. For seeing clearly when I couldn't. For being the father he deserves. She walked away without looking back, and Kyle watched her disappear into the crowd of people living lives that hadn't been shattered by professional predators and personal failures. That evening, Kyle sat with Tommy as they built another elaborate tower, this one incorporating elements of real architecture that Kyle had been teaching his son. Tommy worked with the methodical precision that reminded Kyle of himself, carefully planning each level before committing to placement. Daddy, is Mommy coming to see me this weekend? Kyle had been dreading this conversation, but Tommy deserved honesty. Mommy's moving to Phoenix to live with Aunt Sarah. She won't be visiting every weekend anymore, but she'll still see you during holidays. Tommy considered this information with 5-year-old logic. Is she moving because of the bad choices? Partly, but also because she wants to learn how to make better choices, and sometimes people need space to figure things out. Will she make better choices in Phoenix? Kyle looked at his son, this small person who'd survived abandonment, family dissolution, and exposure to adult complications with remarkable resilience. I hope so, buddy. But even if she doesn't, you and I are going to keep making good choices together. Tommy nodded with the acceptance that children granted to explanations that felt true, even when they were complicated. Can we make the tower taller? Absolutely. As they built together, Kyle reflected on the past year. Derek was in federal prison, facing 8 years of consequences for his professional predation. Monica was moving away to rebuild her life without the constant reminder of her failures. And Kyle and Tommy were constructing something new and strong from the foundation that had survived when everything else crumbled. The tower they built that evening was the tallest yet, steady and straight, and built to last. Like everything else Kyle intended to build for his son's future. In the deep waters of offshore drilling, Kyle had learned that pressure either crushed you or taught you how to be stronger. The pressure Derek had brought to their family had revealed weaknesses that needed to be addressed and strengths that could be built upon. Now, in the calm that followed the storm, Kyle and Tommy were building their future with the kind of methodical precision that could withstand whatever pressures the deep waters of life might bring. And Kyle was finally, truly at peace.